Charles Birkin, or Sir Charles Lloyd Birkin, to give his full name, was a British nobleman who first got his start in writing when he was commissioned by Philip Allen and Company, London, to be the anonymous editor of a series of anthologies of weird or supernatural fiction in 1932. Philip Allen published a slew of these, sometimes as many as 5 a year, and these being all edited by Birkin, bearing titles like Creeps, Shudders, Terrors, Nightmares, etc. Though the stories were accused by noted historian of the weird E.F. Blailer to be mostly lowbrow stuff, they featured stories of such a luminary as H.R. Wakefield himself. In fact, Wakefield's first and probably most well-known collection, They Return at Evening, was put out by Philip Allen 4 years prior, in 1928. While editing these anthologies, Birkin couldn't resist submitting his own stories under the pseudonym of Charles Lloyd, and these stories were collected later in the very first collection published by Birkin under his own name, Devil's Spawn. This book may as well best represent what it was that led T.E.D. Klein to refer to Birkin's writing as genteelly tricked-up sadism. Of the two collections discussed today, Devil's Spawn certainly has a lot of moments where one is taken aback. There are stories of horrible undeserving fates leveled onto people relatively or wholly blameless, and Birkin does not shy away from inventing the most horrendous imaginable fates, far beyond what you or I could ever dream up, for even the children involved. And yet, despite a few of the stories in this collection being very much an exercise in sadistic revelry, I must stress that there is no real gore per se. Birkin doesn't rely on cheap scare of this sort, and if there is occasionally some body horror, it is not splattered with gore, but is very unsettling for wholly different reasons. There are one or two supernatural stories here, such as the much-lauded The Terror on Toppet, which reminds me of something Lovecraft would write if he were less obsessed with his contemporary equivalent of a thesaurus, or what John Ray or John Metcalfe would write, with the caveat that these stories, if written by either of them, would have a lot more dastardly old rogues about. But even so, though it is a masterful little thing, the collection is mostly focused on conte cruels. Now, Devil's Spawn would remain Birkin's only book for nigh on 30 years, until he was persuaded by Dennis Wheatley to take up the mantle once more. His initial 1964 collection, The Kiss of Death, was followed only a year later by his probably most famous and certainly most reprinted collection, The Smell of Evil, in 1965. Not having read The Kiss of Death yet, I cannot speak as to the contents of that collection, but it would seem likely that the trend that is found in The Smell of Evil was also represented in that book, namely that what we see here, compared to his initial unbridled savagery, is a much more mellower Birkin than the man of 30 years prior. The title story of The Smell of Evil is an odd choice for such an honour, as it is a bit confusingly written, and the significance of the title doesn't have as much oomph as one would suspect. Perhaps the story was selected as a title story simply on the merit of the title rather than the quality of the tale itself. The Godmothers also doesn't really use the theme of insanity and murder as efficiently as one could hope, and ends rather abruptly. However, Text for Today seems like a chop-off of classic Birkin, for ill or worse. Green Fingers is a delicious exercise in devilry, and one almost feels like reality fashioned Birkin, so that when the time came for World War II, he would be there to take the whole insanity of that time in Germany and to distill it into a story, with Birkin's perfect talent for the cruel, surprising, but refined. It is a story that Leon Boy himself would write if he ever lived to hear of Auschwitz. For example, Ballet Negre, to quote from the original title, Keep Your Shirts On, Folks, that's the title of the story, reminds me of Heinz Evers whenever he wrote about Haiti, and it's another one of the rare occasions where Birkin finds it fit to dispense with humans and their long-proven proficiency at maiming each other horrifically, and has recourse to use a supernatural agency. Now, I believe that is enough for the individual stories. So as to the overall summary, perhaps Birkin sometimes goes too far. Perhaps he is not on the level of the king of American conte cruels, W.C. Morrow, but he's certainly a fit representative of his native soil in this respect. Perhaps it is best to sample Birkin's later collection, The Smell of Evil, first, to see if you have the stomach for the original, as Birkin is really an acquired taste.